Hi, I'm Riley, and I'm a pharmacist. I was reading an article on Medscape under the ethics section on presenteeism. Presenteeism is the opposite of absenteeism, and it's when healthcare workers show up to work when they are ill or sick or otherwise unable to perform their duties at 100% capacity. Most often, this is spoken of with respect to nursing and physicians or other clinical providers who, when they develop a cough or a sore throat or a fever or diarrhea, may may forego calling in sick and instead show up to work with potential sick issues. Now, I say most often it's kind of a infectious disease concern, but it can also occur with people who show up to work having pulled a muscle or strained their back, especially with nursing, where moving patients around can definitely exacerbate that condition, or that condition can limit how effectively a nurse can perform those duties. So in healthcare, this is a real problem because myself coming from an infectious disease background, you want to avoid any any possibility of a healthcare worker passing on an illness to a patient. And you certainly also want to avoid healthcare workers passing on any form of infectious disease to other healthcare workers, because those kinds of infections can spread amongst healthcare workers and thereby amongst the patients and their families and visitors. The article on Medscape that I read was a response. So they had held a survey for physicians and physician assistants and nurses to answer why, when you're sick, why would you still come into work? And there's a wide range of answers to that. In fact, there was also an article in JAMA Pediatrics recently that looked at physicians and other clinical providers, their reasoning for why would they come into work when sick, and what kind of illnesses would they still feel, would they still come into work while having such an illness. And it included things like respiratory infections and GI disturbances and musculoskeletal problems and things like that. And so part of the reason people will come in, I'm going to call positive reasons, and this is something where the person feels a desire to come in, is the fact that they feel like they're letting their coworkers down if they don't show up to work, the fact that they're letting their patients down if they don't show up to work. They know that if they're absent from work with illness, that someone else is going to have to pick up that whatever duties they would have performed. And they feel like that would be a burden of some sort. So that would be what I'm calling the positive. The negative, or the guilt trip kind of reason, those are also guilt trips, but sort of the negative reinforcement reasons are unforgiving illness policies, where in certain hospitals you will be penalized overtly or covertly for calling in sick. And this takes the form of, for example, with nursing, rather than having vacation days and sick days, they have just a one single pool of paid time off. So any day that you stay home sick is one less day of vacation time. And so that's a disincentive to calling in sick. There's definitely guilt trips in this survey, in the response to the survey with the reasoning. A lot of nurses brought up the fact that if they were to call in sick, there's a very overt guilt trip on the phone of, you're the second person to call in sick, or I don't know what we're going to do. We don't have anybody else that we can call in. There's only 2 people here, and we're normally supposed to have 6 because everybody's out. And they feel a lot of pressure to not call in. There's also punitive disincentives, where if you call in too often, X amount of days over X amount of time, then you're going to be put on a form of sick leave probation, where you're not allowed to take any more sick leave for the end of the year, or you could be terminated from employment. Or there was another one that I just had and has slipped my mind. But there can be these punitive actions. And most of the articles that I looked up briefly today in researching this have dealt with the two basic aspects. On the one hand, the sick individual feeling a sense of duty and responsibility, and feeling that if they were to call in sick, they are shirking that responsibility or placing it on another person's shoulders, and that makes them feel bad. And on the other hand, there were a lot of reasoning and complaints of a very unnavigable human resources kind of issue, where they feel that they're being penalized or punished and certainly disincentivized to taking those sick days, and would, not that they're making this choice consciously, but would rather come to work with an illness than have to deal with the consequences of staying home. And pretty much the biggest issue here is you have healthcare facilities. So hospitals, hospital management, hospital administration will tell you, we don't want you to come into work when you're sick because it puts your coworkers and your patients at risk of catching whatever you might have. But at the same time, they also have policies like the sick day probation periods that definitely say, oh no, we definitely need you to come in when you're sick, even when you're sick. Otherwise, you're going to get punished for it. And that kind of doublespeak is difficult to deal with. How do you put up with wanting to protect your patients and other coworkers from illness, but also having to take all of that onto yourself to avoid the penalties and disincentives? In pharmacy, we deal with this not quite as acutely, I guess I would say, or to the same degree. There's a bit of an issue where if you come to work sick, I've been lucky. I've come to work sick in a couple places, and this was before I finished pharmacy school. I remember when I was a pharmacy technician, I came to work sick, and my boss said, you need to go home now. They were already shorthanded in our pharmacy, but they were not going to have me sick and at work putting people at risk. And so that was very early on in my pharmacy career that I learned that. And there was another time when I was sick, but I felt like I had recovered enough that I could go to work. But that was because from my internal perspective, I was not seeing how poorly I was operating and functioning from an external point of view. And so my boss then told me, no, you definitely aren't able to function properly. We need you to just go home for today and rest up. Most recently, I had my wisdom teeth, all four of them pulled at the same time about, 6 months ago, going on 6 months ago. And I took several days off to recover. I had them pulled on on a Monday because that was the only day that my dentist would pull teeth. And so I had the next 2 days off. And then when I came to work on the third day, after having my teeth pulled, I knew that I was not at 100% functioning. So I wasn't infectious. I wasn't going to inflict any kind of illness on other people, but I knew that I wasn't going to operate at 100%. And so I told my boss, I did, whatever work I could early at work. And then I said, I know that I'm not going to be able to handle this today, and I need to take the rest of the day off, and went back home. And while I wasn't going to inflict any kind of infectious illness on people, if I don't do my job as a pharmacist properly, I'm not going to be catching any other types of errors that might occur, any dose adjustment errors, any medication, drug interaction errors, any drug disease state errors, any kind of potential error or issue that comes across my desk. If I'm not coming at it with 100%, then that's going to put people at risk. And that's my purpose in the healthcare system as a pharmacist, is to help manage and avoid those kinds of issues when it comes to medication therapy. So I've been lucky in that where I work and where I have worked in the past, my boss, my administration, as it were, has been very supportive of not putting myself, my coworkers, and my patients at risk, and allowing me to take that time off. And I feel that it's only right that we search for some sort of reform to ensure that other healthcare practitioners, nurses, physicians, physician assistants, whomever it may be, feels comfortable to stay home when they're sick and to not be penalized for staying home when they're sick. I'd love to hear any thoughts you might have. Go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.